The mist over Bodmin Moor never rises quickly. Instead, it clings to the ground as if it remembers something that the rest of Britain has long forgotten. On certain nights, when the wind drags across the heather and the marsh water reflects no light at all, locals say the landscape behaves as if it's guarding a secret written not in books, but in silence, footprints, and disappearances that have never been fully explained. More than one traveler has claimed that the moor feels alive, as if it's watching from beneath the peat and bramble, waiting for someone to listen. Those who did and dared to speak agreed on one thing: whatever hides there is older than England itself. The curious reputation of Bodmin Moor was not born from folklore alone. Even government records have been forced to acknowledge unusual incidents, strange reports, and traces of something moving through the marsh long before a clear road was cut across it. The earliest accounts appear in church documents from the late 13th century, where monks described a roaming presence, disturbing livestock and scattering horses in panic. The handwriting, faded by centuries, still conveys a trembling urgency, as if the author was writing faster than thought. No explanation followed, only a plea to avoid the east pasture at night. This description might have remained no more than a medieval superstition if similar reports hadn't continued for hundreds of years afterward. Farmers in the 1600s complained of cattle found with no marks of attack, yet rendered unable to stand, as if terrified into paralysis. Carriage drivers in the 18th century spoke of shapes moving against the landscape, like a body without form, thick and low to the ground, keeping pace silently beside the wheels. None could describe it clearly. They insisted it wasn't smoke, nor fog, nor a wild animal they recognized. One driver, from 1782, recorded hearing something breathe, but admitted he could not determine whether it came from a throat or the land itself. Yet Bodmin Moor's most controversial mystery would not appear until the 1970s. By then, Britain believed itself removed from ancient fears. The moor had road access, electricity, tourism trails. But on a September evening in 1978, a series of livestock deaths drew attention not only from local farmers, but from journalists and police patrols who were unprepared for the reaction they would face. Sheep were found scattered, untouched by predators, as if they had simply collapsed where they stood. Examined closely, they showed signs of panic, wide eyes, strained muscles, yet no injury. Investigators gave no official cause. Rumors spread rapidly, amplified by late-night radio hosts and regional newspapers hungry for headlines. Some blamed rogue dogs, despite no tracks being discovered. Others insisted a large cat roamed the moor, escaped from a private collection. But those theories did not fit the earliest accounts, nor explain the silent nature of whatever stalked the fields. What unsettled people most was the impression that every witness described a presence rather than a body, something you feel before you see, something that might not need shape at all. Police involvement only intensified the mystery. Officers assigned to monitor the area reported hearing sounds they could not trace, low vibrations, like a distant engine running beneath the soil. They followed them through bracken and mud, only to find stillness when they stopped. A sergeant involved at the time later admitted in a private interview that the phenomenon left him uneasy, not because of what he saw, but because of what he couldn't. He claimed that at one point his radio crackled with a faint rhythm resembling breathing, though no one on the other end acknowledged it. The official report omitted this statement entirely. Soon, things escalated beyond livestock. In early 1979, several hikers went missing for hours, later found disoriented and unable to describe where they had been. One of them, a teacher named Marion Collins, wrote a sworn statement asserting she felt something pressing against her thoughts, as though the land itself were trying to persuade her to leave. She described an intangible pressure that built across her chest without physical contact. Doctors dismissed her account as stress. Locals, however, recognized the fear. They had grown up hearing grandparents speak of the moor's ability to turn a mind back on itself. Curiously, long before modern police records, there existed a forgotten body of observations collected by a 19th-century naturalist named William Pengelly. Better known for his archaeological work in Devon caves, Pengelly kept private journals during his excursions across Bodmin Moor between 1845 and 1870. These journals, rediscovered only in the 1990s during a routine archive review, revealed his fascination not with animals or plants, but with what he described as a presence without a specimen. He noted the absence of typical predator behavior and an unusual stillness that would fall upon the moor like a held breath. One entry reads, "I sense movement, yet find none. The ground seems aware of my steps before I make them." Pengelly's notes remained unprinted during his lifetime, dismissed as a distraction from his geological achievements. Yet when a handful of historians revisited them, the descriptions aligned disturbingly well with modern encounters. What seemed like poetic exaggeration proved consistent with police testimonies, farmer reports, and statements from ramblers who felt watched but saw nothing. The moor, it seemed, inspired the same fear across centuries, without providing any physical evidence to define it. The question that began to emerge was not whether something existed on the moor, but why no trace of it, no bones, tracks, or droppings had ever been discovered. Experts proposed theories ranging from atmospheric conditions causing hallucinations to mass hysteria triggered by isolation. But none could explain how entire flocks reacted at once, or how people with no shared background reported nearly identical sensations. The moor seemed to produce fear with consistency, as though fear itself were the artifact. By the early 1980s, local authorities attempted to close the subject publicly, insisting there was no tangible threat to residents or visitors. Yet they never fully addressed the expanding archive of private reports, nor the oddly incomplete nature of the official files. Pages appeared to be missing from police logs. Statements were condensed or rewritten in bureaucratic language that stripped them of specificity. Many believed something had been quietly removed. What emerged decades later suggested that the omissions were deliberate. In 2006, through a Freedom of Information request, journalists gained partial access to redacted government correspondence regarding Bodmin Moor from the late 1970s and early 1980s. Among routine memos on rural crime and agricultural issues, one letter stood out. It referenced unexplained stimuli affecting coordinated animal response and recommended that the subject be handled without public discourse to prevent imaginative escalation. The wording was clinical, but the implication was clear. Authorities were aware something unusual was influencing livestock, yet refused to investigate it openly. This secrecy took an even stranger turn when researchers compared the behavior of animals on Bodmin Moor with historical documentation from other parts of Britain. Similar descriptions appeared around certain prehistoric sites: standing stones, ring-shaped earthworks, and Bronze Age burial mounds. In multiple instances, sheep and horses reacted to specific locations with panic, despite no visible threat. Bodmin Moor, curiously, has an unusually high concentration of such ancient features, including stone circles like the hurlers and burial mounds that date back over 3,000 years. Some archaeologists began to wonder whether the landscape itself might be exerting an effect, not through ghosts or legends, but through something physical that remains unidentified. Geologists proposed that underground faults could produce low-frequency vibrations, sounds below human hearing but capable of disturbing animals. These infrasound waves, they argued, might cause anxiety, disorientation, or fear. It seemed a rational answer, yet it did not account for eyewitness accounts describing movement, breathing, or the feeling of being followed. Infrasound could unsettle the mind, but it did not stalk footsteps or mimic the sensation of something circling a camp in the dark. Then came an unexpected discovery from the archives of the Royal Engineers. While surveying the moor in 1957 for military training suitability, they reported difficulty using standard acoustic equipment. Notes from the survey recorded interference patterns without identifiable source and disturbances in soil resonance inconsistent with topography. The files were not classified, but were shelved as irrelevant and eventually forgotten until historians reviewing land use stumbled upon them. What caught attention wasn't the data itself, but the engineer's comment that the moor responds unpredictably to sonic mapping. It implied the land was interacting with sound in a way not typical of natural terrain. If the ground could affect sound, then perhaps it also affected perception. Hikers lost their sense of direction. Animals panicked without cause. People described hearing breath where there was none, footsteps trailing them without weight. Could Bodmin Moor distort sensory input? Might it create the impression of a presence without one physically existing? Scientists were tempted by the idea, but it conflicted with testimonies describing something more deliberate than random perception. A sense of intent, like an unseen intelligence that observed rather than merely being sensed. And so the moor remains suspended between science and mystery, difficult to explain, yet impossible to dismiss. Each new theory only added another layer, never replacing the uncertainty beneath. The landscape offered no answers, only repetition, fear, confusion, and silence. It was as if Bodmin Moor resisted definition, not by hiding what it contained, but by refusing human interpretation. In 2011, a discovery shifted the conversation from speculation to something far more disturbing. A small team of environmental researchers studying soil degradation near Brown Willie, the highest point on the moor, recorded an anomaly none of them expected. They identified patterns of mineral distribution that suggested repeated disturbance over centuries, as if large masses had moved through the soil without leaving visible trails above ground. The data implied pressure, weight, and displacement, but no marks on the surface. One researcher, Dr. Helen Ives, described it as a path underground, following no human or animal logic. The team mapped the anomaly and found that the subterranean disturbances aligned with several locations historically associated with fear or odd behavior in livestock. Farm animals avoided these paths instinctively, turning away as if smelling something that humans could not detect. The researchers attempted a chemical explanation, searching for traces of toxic gases, heavy metals, or unusual organic compounds. Yet the soil was clean, ordinary, even healthier than surrounding areas. It seemed the ground had been disturbed not by decay or contamination, but by something moving through it repeatedly across generations. What unsettled the team most was not the discovery itself, but the reaction to it. Shortly after the findings were shared with local authorities, funding for the study was withdrawn. The research equipment was collected by government representatives for reassessment, and 2 team members were advised to avoid further independent investigation. Dr. Ives later reported receiving a letter reminding her of confidentiality clauses that had not been present in her original contract. She called the wording overcautious to the point of intimidation. This attempt to suppress curiosity echoed the mid-20th century silence, the redacted memos, and the rewritten police reports. The moor's mysteries were not merely unsolved, they were being actively contained. But why? If there was no creature, no threat, no verifiable danger, what was being protected? The land itself, or the reputation of those who failed to explain it? At this point, historians began to revisit the earliest stories with renewed seriousness. They examined medieval accounts not as superstition, but as data. The monks who heard something roaming the fields, the farmers whose animals froze without injury, the carriage driver who listened to a breath in the dark. What if all of these described the same phenomenon, unchanged by time? A force that does not hunt, does not kill, yet provokes an instinctive terror. Not a predator, but a presence that moves through the moor silently, perhaps beneath it, influencing everything around it without ever revealing a body. Theories became more cautious, yet more profound. Some suggested the moor's unique geology could act as a conductor for sound or vibration, amplifying unknown natural forces. Others speculated that ancient peoples might have sensed something in the land, marking it with stone circles not as monuments but as boundaries, markers to warn future generations, not to commemorate the past. The placement of these stones, seen through this perspective, resembled not rituals but containment lines. The idea seemed bold, yet the evidence of subterranean movement made it harder to dismiss. For the first time, the mystery of Bodmin Moor was no longer about a beast or a legend. It was about interaction between human perception and a landscape behaving in ways science could measure but not interpret. Something shaping emotion without language, influencing movement without touch, and leaving behind a trail only visible beneath the earth. As the investigation shifted from mythology to a more unsettling reality, one final question remained. Was the moor acting on its own, or was something using the landscape as a medium? If the ground could distort sound, induce panic, and hide movement beneath the soil, and perhaps the most troubling possibility was not a creature, but a phenomenon that behaves with purpose. Something that does not need form to exist. Something that interacts without revealing itself. In 2019, a small group of researchers revisited the Royal Engineers' acoustic anomalies using modern equipment. They discovered pockets of resonance concentrated around certain prehistoric sites. When low-frequency vibrations were introduced, the moor produced unpredictable feedback, almost as if it were reacting to stimulus. The response was not uniform. It varied depending on direction and intensity, suggesting a level of complexity no one expected from terrain. Although the research was not extensive enough to widespread draw conclusions, one participant described the sensation as hearing a reply where no reply should be. Such discoveries have inspired a quiet shift among those who study the moor. Instead of searching for a hidden creature, they now explore the possibility of an environmental intelligence, a form of natural behavior beyond current scientific definition. If the moor influences minds and animals, it may do so the way a cave shapes sound, or the way a magnet shapes metal filings, by existing. And if something beneath it moves, unseen yet consistent over centuries, then perhaps the landscape is not passive at all. Perhaps it is a system, ancient and indifferent, with patterns we are only beginning to detect. Today, visitors walk Bodmin Moor, unaware of the unresolved history beneath their feet. Tourists photograph the stone circles, believing them mystical relics without considering their possible function. Farmers continue to work the land, accepting the moor's moods the way sailors accept the sea. The official stance remains silence. There is nothing to investigate, nothing to fear. Yet the archives tell another story, one of deliberate omissions, unanswered questions, and evidence that does not fit within familiar categories. The moor endures, unmeasured, undefined, and still capable of provoking the same fear it inspired centuries ago. Perhaps the mystery is not meant to be solved, only respected. Bodmin Moor has shaped human emotion for generations without leaving a single identifiable trace of what causes it. That may be the most profound revelation of all. Some places do not need secrets to be unknown. They simply remain beyond interpretation, resistant to human certainty, untouched by explanation. We expect mysteries to provide answers. Bodmin Moor suggests that the mystery is the answer. If you value quiet investigations into Britain's deeper past, consider being part of this journey. Subscribe for future explorations like this one. And if the moor has left you with a thought, a theory, or a question, share it in the comments. After all, interpretations are the only evidence we can truly leave behind.